I found an interesting article by The Hill. It's called Democrats Have a Kamala Problem and It's Not Going Away Anytime Soon by Liz Peek. Betting odds would give President Joe Biden maybe a 71% chance of being this year's Democratic nominee. But a great many political analysts and almost half of registered voters, according to a recent Monmouth University poll, don't buy it. Democrats are panicking, aware that Joe Biden is not up for another 4 years in the Oval Office. Joe Rogan recently predicted that California Governor Gavin Newsom could step in to replace Biden. Others have suggested that Gretchen Whitmer or possibly Michelle Obama. But nominating the candidate to replace him faces a massive speed bump. Kamala Harris, far from bowing to widespread skepticism about her electability. The vice president looks like she's gearing up for the fight, and she's not going anywhere. Whereas Biden appears to have a schedule suited to an 80-year-old retiree with limited stamina, Harris is a busy bee, crisscrossing the country to meet with donors and various interest groups representing the U.S. recently at the Munich Security Conference, showing up in swing state Pennsylvania to hand out $200 million for clean water projects, touring college to get students whopped up about abortion rights and threats to democracy, and generally becoming the face of the Biden White House. At the same time, she has been quietly insulating herself into top Democrat circles, listening to their concerns and acting as a helpful messenger to the standoffish Biden election team. CNN reported recently that Harris has been hosting Saturday sessions and dinners at the Naval Observatory with top funders and party politicians hearing their complaints about the half-baked Biden campaign. Multiple leading Democrats say their conversations with Harris have been a surprising and welcome change after months of feeling slogged off by the White House and Biden campaign headquarters. According to CNN, Harris's canny overtures specifically to the black community are well received, with many donors and colleagues giving her high marks. While Harris is careful to declare allegiance to President Biden and to portray her outreach in the service of the joint campaign, it's clear she has an eye toward the future. CNN ran a favorable opinion piece about the former senator in recent days by Basil Smikle, a black former Democratic official, tagged Kamala Harris not a liability. She may be Democrats' best weapon. Smikle argues that Harris is the future face of the Democratic Party and has been unfairly criticized by a barrage of tropes of the kind regularly encountered by women and minorities. Oh my God. Smikle dismisses the nitpicky critiques that have dragged down Harris's standing but never identifies what the complaints are. He writes for accomplishments but doesn't mention her endless word salads, her failure to address the catastrophe of the southern border, her inability to retain staff, or a host of other criticisms that have been logged against the vice president. Nor does he mention that her 2020 presidential campaign was a complete bust. Voters did not warm to her. Smikle contends that it is her appeal within the black community, and especially with young people, that is most important to the Biden-Harris ticket. That would be more persuasive if her standing with young and minority voters exceeded Joe Biden's, but it does not. A recent survey of 1,000 black voters showed Harris lagging behind Joe Biden, with both black voters under the age of 35 and also those older than 35. Both candidates run way behind Barack Obama with both groups. Harris's frenetic schedule hasn't boosted her approval rating overall, which remained mirrored in deeply negative territory. The Real Clear Politics average of polls show her job approval underwater by 22 points. That's worse than Joe Biden, who's down by 14.5 points. What's more, Harris has steadily slid downhill over the past 3 years. Throughout most of 2021, voters were generally neutral on Harris. It was in the fall of that year when she took a sudden nosedive, never to recover. Her downfall has accelerated with the increased number of people entering the country illegally. Voters and the White House identified her as the border Caesar. As the migrant flood grew, voters were appalled by her inability to confront or stem the tide, submerized by her disaster interview with NBC's Lester Holt. In that sit-down, the NBC reporter challenged her, saying, "You haven't been to the border." Harris acted as though she didn't understand the issue, responding, "And I haven't been to Europe," as though both were of equal consequence. The most recent read on her favorability, God, shows her numbers worse than those of any other political leader, including both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. That's a pretty deep hole to dig out of. And that is why she is rarely mentioned as a possible replacement for Biden. Democrats know she'd be a disastrous candidate, but that doesn't mean Harris has come to the same conclusion. Just recently, Harris pushed back at the criticisms of at the critics who do not consider her to be presidential material, declaring, "I am ready to serve. There's no question about that." Writing in the New York Times recently, columnist Ross Dutat asserts that Joe Biden should not be running for re-election, but recognizes he is trapped by his own terrible vice presidential choice, who is even more likely to lose to Donald Trump. He suggests that if the president drops out but doesn't endorse Kamala Harris, he will be accused of racism. His solution is that Biden should withdraw from the race to the Democratic National Convention, aware that the fight to replace him will be bloody but ultimately productive in allowing the party to choose someone other than Harris to be a Democratic nominee. He proposes that Harris and other disappointed contenders would accept a behind-the-scenes proffer and fall in line if the convention battle doesn't go their way. Good luck with that. Such a proffer would have to be huge, a Supreme Court spot, and even so, Kamala Harris is not likely to go quietly. Boy, what an article. Have I seen this writer before? I don't think so. Only Liz I'm familiar with is Liz Cheney. So, where do we start? I guess my favorite part is probably where she says, or rather where she writes, Biden appears to have a schedule suited for an 80-year-old retiree with limited stamina. That is true. I mean, when's the last time you saw him sit down for a half-hour interview? I feel like I'm seeing Harris more and more and Biden less and less. Like, if I see him, it's like a little tiny press gaggle, or maybe he gives a speech somewhere where nobody has to, like, directly challenge you, reading off some teleprompter. So she has, to a very agreeable extent, become the Biden White House's mascot, the person that I see the most often, or at least that's how I've been observing it. And her representing the U.S. at the Munich Security Conference was a really big deal because, as far as I can remember, the president usually does that. And let's see here. To go over, because see, I try to be fair, right? Like I try to, if Harris does something right, I'll say she did something, or she does something wrong, I'll admit it. This article has a section where they talk about this CNN article, this opinion piece that was supposed to be like positive about Harris, right? And they say the guy argued that Harris is the future face Democratic Party and has been unfairly criticized by a barrage of tropes that are applied to women and minorities, and then doesn't like specifically say what the complaints are, which also, you know, and when he lists the accomplishments, he doesn't like name any of the stuff that people have criticized her for, which are the word salads, her failure to address the catastrophe at the, and really the border thing drives me crazy because as vice president, what, you know, and like I'm not even trying to be funny. What can she do that Biden cannot? Like I already was just kind of whatever with her, but that was one scenario where I thought, and you know, you could say that the Lester Holt interview also hurt her because when you respond to you haven't been to the border and I haven't been to Europe either, it shows you are not able to understand that this is an issue, or at least that you're not taking it as seriously as people who are concerned about it would like you to take it. So I can acknowledge she responded in a way that was not smart in that interview. But when it comes to actually solving this issue, I can't understand what, and again, Biden set her up for that one. You know, that's more his fault than hers. What she would have done or was supposed to do that he himself could not. Was she supposed to rally the House and Senate to pass a border deal, and go and meet with Trump and tell him shut up so we can actually pass something so I can look better for my own presidential campaign in 2028 or 32? Like it's nuts to me that you give her this subject, one of really considered by a lot of people one of the most important issues, period, immigration. That's Trump's signature issue, and that's an issue a lot of people are very concerned about. And you're like, okay, person who's in a position where they have no defined role, go solve this for me. So I will defend her on that because I do think that's unfair to give her in the role that she has. Her approval rating is in the tank. I mean, we've all known that. Job approval rating underwater by 22%. And voters who are generally neutral on her have now seen her get this downfall having to do with the immigration issue. And her numbers are worse than, her favorability is worse than both Trump and Biden. And see, I tried to explain this to somebody. I said, the reason the Democrats don't want to run Harris, and they're in this like really big pickles because when 2020 was going on, we had this pandemic where people were sitting at home. The candidates didn't really have to campaign, they didn't really have to be that energetic. They could just go on TV, do an interview, and that was it. Maybe a debate that goes for like a few hours, but it's mostly just them standing there, right? But now in a 4 year later time period, almost completely different ball game where now you have this 80 something year old man that a lot of people don't think is going to be able to serve out a full term, second term rather, and he has this vice president that he picked mainly as a way of meeting a quota because Clyburn endorsed him in South Carolina, and that's when he was able to turn the tide against Bernie. And in picking this vice president who was a one-term senator, you have also someone who, remind you, one-term senator who ran for president and completely flopped. She couldn't even last until voting started in Iowa. Her 2020 campaign didn't even make it to 2020. So this is a lady who was rejected by the voters, who really is not seen as having anywhere near the experience that someone like Biden had even back in like 2008, 30-something years in the Senate, that is in this position where, thanks to the age of the president that she's serving under, and the fact that she was only elected as someone who was on the ticket with someone else, not actually coming anywhere close to winning the Democratic primary last time around, there is a feeling that voters are dissatisfied by the idea of having this person who they rejected when she ran for president as their next president. That's just the reality. And this whole thing about having a convention where, they're going to put, what I've heard from sources like Due Dissonance is the idea that after Biden wins most of the states or primaries, they're going to have this convention where they get to like switch him out with somebody else, and then the voters can't do anything about it. But I do think they should be more worried about voters reacting negatively than Harris. I mean, she's not exactly that popular herself, and I do think it is like screwed up to put somebody a heartbeat away from the presidency, and then when you get rid of the president, you're like, oh nope, sorry, we're cutting you out for somebody else from California, or Michigan if you're talking about Whitmer. And I can't see a scenario where if they really try to pull this in a few months at that convention, there isn't something completely disgusting that's going to end up really destroying the Democrats' chances of being able to win this year. So they have two options. You either keep Biden around, which I think they're going to do. Like Eric said, he might not make it. I know Cornel West said that I covered it, but I think Biden is going to be their nominee. Now, again, if he serves out the whole 4 years of his term, that's debatable, but I think he will at least be their nominee. And if they try to replace him with somebody else, even with Harris, their chances of winning this election go even further down the toilet. Harris has always been an individual who, as a national figure, was neutral to disliked. That's just the reality of it. She was losing in presidential primary polls in her own home state of California to somebody like Andrew Yang, who wasn't even an elected official. She won, her Senate seat, right? And that's really the only statewide race she was able to win ever. And after that, launched this really goofy word salad platitude presidential campaign that went down in flames. But because Biden made a promise to Clyburn, he was like, all right, time to join me. So yeah, I think the Democrats really have doomed themselves. And there's no way for them to win this without pissing off someone or messing something up. So they better just hope that Biden is able to be okay until November, and then after that they can try and pull whatever crazy shenanigans. Although it's going to be harder to get rid of Harris if she gets reelected as VP. But they really have no one to blame but themselves for their diversity pick. Like I said, if they picked someone that was much more well liked, even back when they were just a statewide official, like a senator, like a governor, this wouldn't be happening. But they took Harris. They gave her really nothing to do, except something that she couldn't solve anything with regard to. And now they're hoping they can dodge having her as their presidential nominee because they're afraid she's going to lose Trump, which is realistic. I'm not going to pretend that that couldn't end up happening, but it's like you guys set yourself up for this. Like the voters rejected this lady, and then you put her right next to the president as his successor. When you think of who's going to be president after Joe Biden, you think of the person who wasn't able to win a single state or primary that ran against Joe Biden. It's like you did this. You caused it. So this year is going to be really crazy, and I think Harris is going to be at the center of a lot of it.